Since the first Climate Act was passed by this Parliament, I've warned that we had at the time consensus on the destination, but not on the actions that were necessary. And I have to say that in recent months, it's become increasingly clear that the Conservative Party has detached itself even from that consensus on the destination. The setting of the 2045 target was a little over 5 years ago, and the final Tory speaker in that debate, when Parliament agreed that target, said the Committee on Climate Change outlined how Scotland can go faster and further in achieving net zero emissions. I support the principle that we need to go further and faster for the good of both the economy and the global environment. And the Tory speaker closed that debate with the words, "We are confident that the bill lays the foundations for a climate change plan that will support innovation, create jobs and use technology, as well as addressing the undeniable climate change emergency that we face." It's now inconceivable that a member of the Conservative Party would make a speech like that, railing as they do against renewable infrastructure, whether that's transmission infrastructure, whether that's storage or anything else. And now, it looks as though the future direction of travel is even worse, with Andrew Bowie, the acting Shadow Secretary of State, openly describing the IPCC as biased. The Conservatives today say that they want evidence-based debate. Mr Bowie had no evidence for that, and in fact when he said there's quite a few scientists that say we don't need to get to net zero by 2050, he was of course unable to name any. He said that there's no scientific rationale for choosing 2050 as the point to which we should reach net zero. That is utterly at odds with the evidence that the scientific community have provided from around the world. What do we need then in order to reach net zero and to do it through a just transition? Well, first of all, we need political leadership. That means not just backing targets, but not blocking the actions that are necessary. There have been far too many politicians who voted for targets and then blocked the actions that are necessary, whether that's on transport, on heat, on land use or anything else. We do need urgency from the Scottish Government. The ESJTP, the Energy Strategy and Just Transition Plan, has been delayed for far too long, and it must include that strong presumption against new fossil fuel extraction, and the urgency that must come through the new climate plan as well. We've seen far too long when the 2030 target was slipping out of reach as a result of inaction over the first 15 years of this journey. If that track record of the last 15 years is repeated for the final 20 years of this transition, we will fail. But we need not fail if we have the urgency that's needed now. And finally, and I think most crucially, what we need is accountability of the fossil fuel industry itself, which has made vast profits, including from the North Sea, over many, many years. It spent decades covering up what it knew about the climate change it was causing. It then spent decades more funding and seeding climate denial conspiracies around the world, and more recently has moved to a position of climate delay, and is abandoning its workforce. If it had invested any fraction of those vast profits in the transition, in the workforce that it owes a moral responsibility to, the situation would be very, very different. And it has made negligible, I don't have time, it has made negligible investment in renewables as well. The International Energy Agency has stated, for the moment, the oil and gas industry as a whole is a marginal force in the world's transition to a clean energy system. And that, presiding officer, was before they started slashing investment in renewables further and doubling down on fossil fuels. In closing, I will come on to where we can raise the funds necessary, including from the industry, to invest in the just transition that neither government is yet providing.
Patrick Harvey again, up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, presiding officer. I genuinely do hope that those in the Conservative Party, and they are still out there somewhere, who want their party to continue to give leadership on climate action, I hope they're able at some point to take back control of their party, if I can borrow that phrase. But it's very clear that under the current leadership, both in Scotland and the UK, they are abandoning their commitment to net zero, whether by 2045 or 2050. Both party leaders have said so, and they've said nothing about what the alternative target date should be. I hope though, for the rest of the political spectrum, that when we see, which I think the government already has seen, but when the rest of us see the advice from the CCC on the new carbon budgets, not seen it yet? Okay, well, I hope when we all see it and we see the response to it, that we will all reject the kind of anti-climate rhetoric that we're hearing far too much. Because just as on other parts of the far right's rhetoric, copying it, aping it, will do nothing to defeat it. And so we should not do what the Conservatives are doing by copying reform on this issue. But in the opening speech, I used so much of my time pouring scorn on the Conservative position that I forgot to pour any on the two amendments that we have before us today. On the SNP amendment, they are correct, of course, to call out the Tories' anti-climate rhetoric and to highlight the impact on employment, including at Grangemouth. But they fail to acknowledge that the unjust transition that we are now seeing is the result of choices being made by an industry, by private sector interests, which have extracted vast profits over many, many years and are now abandoning its workers and not being held to account by either government. The idea that the best response now is a massive tax cut for the fossil fuel profiteers who have caused this crisis simply beggars belief. And as for the Labour amendment, this, I had to say, coming again from a political party that is still equivocating on the future of the unlawfully granted licences for Rosebank and Jackdaw. They haven't told us whether they're going to finally kill off those projects that were unlawfully granted by the previous government. But they're also continuing their obsession with nuclear. And look, even before we consider the issues of nuclear safety or waste, nuclear is wildly expensive and slow to build. It cannot and will not help with the Labour government's own goal of decarbonising electricity by 2030. It is simply too slow to do that. And more to the point, Scotland doesn't need it. More generating capacity is not our challenge. Our challenge is in grid infrastructure, in storage, in interconnection, and for consumers in the artificially high price that people are being forced to pay for renewable electricity that's cheap to produce, but expensive to consume, as well as other barriers to the uptake of electricity to displace fossil fuels from heat and transport. Finally, Presiding Officer, I want to draw members' attention to the paper produced by Oil Change International, which sets out clear measures about how the UK government could raise over £6 billion a year to fund the just transition. And it does include taking money from the fossil fuel profiteers, converting the temporary energy profits levy into a permanent, predictable, fair tax on the big oil industry, generating at least £2 billion annually, as well as closing tax loopholes that are benefiting those who don't need it, and stopping funding fossil fuels. Because